Hello everybody, Jordan here, the PH is silent. Today we are talking about Curse of Strahd, which is a Ravenloft adventure. So Curse of Strahd takes place in Ravenloft, which is the name of the original 32-page adventure back in 1982. And that adventure spawned a whole campaign setting and a bunch of other stuff when the popularity of Ravenloft just got so big. They were like, let's evolve this into a complete campaign setting and kind of fill out all the cracks of it. Because it did just start as a silly little module about vampires and werewolves and things like that, but it changed over the course of time. It was revised for D&D 3.5, and there is a D&D 3.0 campaign setting for Ravenloft that kind of expands the entire world and these weird domains of dread where Barovia takes place in. As of 4th edition, they were wrapping up the Domains of Dread into the Shadowfell and kind of trying to make it all fit into that. So it's kind of a mixture. Current Ravenloft, Curse of Strahd, boom. Curse of Strahd is kind of a mixture of the 3.0 era and the 4th edition era, because we still have things like the Shadowfell and stuff with the 5th edition Curse of Strahd. Ravenloft was the module that sparked gothic horror in D&D. Before that, we had mostly fantasy, and this was a way of introducing lots of vampires and hopelessness and just kind of a new type of horror element for D&D. And I wanted you to read some quotes from the Ravenloft campaign because I think it really instills that sense of dread. The fortress, Ravenloft Castle, sits at the center of a misty realm like a beating heart, pumping evil and sorrow to even the most distant fingers of the land. Hope is nothing more than a lure within the land of mists, and success is for the extremely lucky and the precious few. So let's dive into the history of Ravenloft and the lore behind Curse of Strahd, and then afterwards I'll kind of give my thoughts on the adventure and we'll talk a little bit more.
There isn't necessarily Forgotten Realms lore to be tied in with Ravenloft. That is because Ravenloft is its own campaign setting that has been strategically placed in the D&D multiverse. Not really its own planet, instead Ravenloft and Curse of Strahd take place in a plane referred to as the Domains of Dread. It's linked to the Forgotten Realms by way of the ethereal plane, and in 4th edition Barovia and the Domains of Dread were recharacterized as a subsection of the Shadowfell. Barovia, where our adventure takes place, is just one of these Domains of Dread, each with its own ruler and surrounded by a gray dark mist. It was earlier in the 1980s that this mist was linked to the ethereal plane, and Barovia and the other Domains of Dread were actually part of that, lost within the ethereal plane. When running Curse of Strahd, I think it's important to remember that Barovia and Castle Ravenloft are a microcosm unto itself, a solid and physical dimension with its own set of mystical laws. Those that are pulled into Barovia are brought there because of the gray mist that surrounds it. A group of camping adventurers in the Forgotten Realms might find themselves surrounded by a strange mist only to wake up in Barovia. But to exit via the mist causes almost certain death. A creature that starts its turn in the fog must succeed on a DC 20 Constitution saving throw or gain 1 level of exhaustion, which can't be removed while creatures are in this fog. Running around through the fog returns you back to Barovia eventually, except certain creatures, as mentioned in older Ravenloft material, that are able to traverse the mist and find themselves in another, different domain of dread. Strahd von Zarovich was a count, a prince, a soldier, and a conqueror. He was a bloodthirsty tyrant that fought his father's enemies, slaying most of them. His father passed away, but Strahd kept waging war against his family's enemies, eventually taking him to a remote mountain valley he conquered and soon named it Barovia after his father, King Barov. His mother was known as Queen Ravnovia and was fearful of Strahd, but showed much affection to her other son, Strahd's brother, Sergei. Strahd's affection for his mother was great, and Strahd called upon wizards and builders to create a castle in Barovia, naming it Castle Ravenloft after his mother. His mother and Sergei were invited to live in Castle Ravenloft with Strahd, and both accepted, but Sergei was the only one to arrive safely. Queen Ravnovia died traversing there. Her body is sealed in a crypt beneath the castle. With Strahd's enemies killed, there was peace, but peace is not what Strahd craved. Strahd, fearful of death, started to study magic, and eventually forged a pact with dark powers of the Shadowfell for immortality. No one knows who or what these dark powers are, and their inclusion in the Shadowfell was a 4th and 5th edition change. It is rumored they control the Domains of Dread, though, and that this is their realm. Sergei, Strahd's younger brother and cleric, made Strahd very jealous. Sergei lived in Castle Ravenloft and eventually met a local villager named Tatiana. The two immediately fell in love, and Sergei brought Tatiana to Castle Ravenloft to announce their plans to wed, asking for Strahd's blessing. Strahd was immediately enraptured with Tatiana. It was the jealousy of his brother and his obsession with Tatiana that drove Strahd to make a pact with the dark powers and death itself. On the day of their marriage, Strahd murdered his brother with an assassin's blade and drank his blood, sealing his pact with the dark powers. This exact moment, the mists surround Barovia and all its citizens became trapped in Strahd's nightmare realm. Strahd then expressed his love for Tatiana, but she fled from him in horror and, not able to get away, threw herself from the castle walls to her death. Strahd was attacked by assassins hired to murder him, the people realizing he was a tyrant. Strahd's pact with the dark powers made him immortal, and as soon as the poison-tipped bolts pierced his body and his heart stopped beating, he became a vampire. He was left only with fury and took his rage out on everyone in the castle. By morning, no one was left alive in Castle Ravenloft, and the domain of dread known as Barovia was born. There are other realms of dread that sometimes drift and connect with Barovia, and if you're curious, I recommend getting the D&D 3.0 Ravenloft campaign setting book. It has more information on the realms of dread which are ruled by other dark lords. Barovia is an interesting place. Souls cannot escape Barovia. Those who die there, their souls become trapped and are reincarnated in babies. It should be noted that not everyone in Barovia has souls. A non-souled Barovian isn't necessarily an evil thing, but they behave constantly frightened and are hard to muster any help from. A woman with a soul can give birth to a soulless child, and a soulless woman can give birth to a child with a soul. Strahd only feeds on creatures with souls. The Vistani are wanderers who live outside of Barovian civilization. They travel in horse-drawn wagons and live in tents. These people are fortunate to not be bound by Strahd's curse and can freely leave Barovia whenever they wish, which is maybe why they are so lighthearted compared to other citizens of Barovia. These people get to come and go because once a group of Vistani rescued mortal Strahd and nursed him back to health after he was wounded in battle. Their ability to leave and safely return is part of Strahd's generosity, declaring that all Vistani have the right to come and go from his land as they please. Some Vistani have allowed themselves to become corrupted by Strahd, and they consider him their king. Using the Vistani, Strahd lures adventurers into the domain of dread. Your players may learn an important lesson that not all Vistani are trustworthy. But even though the Vistani can come and go, Strahd cannot. He is trapped in Barovia as much as the players are. It is his prison, his punishment, his price for being eternal.
Curse of Strahd is a complex adventure. I want to say, first of all, that I really like this adventure, but I would not wish this on a new DM at all. There are many NPCs who are important. You can't just forget about them, and they interact with the story on a meaningful way, so meaningful that there are plenty of points within the Curse of Strahd module that will say, if X happens, do Y, or if X happens, then Y happens, etc. differently. So you have to kind of keep track of the NPCs and the various events that are happening within Curse of Strahd, and that can be a little daunting for a new Dungeon Master. Also, because the module is so dark and eerie, the authors give you a lot of flavor text for just about every room, especially all the rooms within Ravenloft Castle. So as you're exploring, you have flavor text for each one, and this can be kind of repetitive. Like, I understand what they're trying to do. Even empty rooms should have a fear or have something about it that keeps the players on edge. But at the same time, I think reading all of these flavor text out loud over and over and over might do the opposite of that. Granted, I haven't played this, so I'm not really sure, but be forewarned, there is a lot of flavor text that you are encouraged to read as a Dungeon Master. Now, this is an adventure for levels 1 to 10, and you actually start at level 3, but if you want to start at level 1, there is a module within this module called Death House that is kind of an introduction to Barovia to allow you to get from level 1 to 3 safely. After level 3, this adventure becomes a very large sandbox. And in this sandbox, I think it's quite easily for your characters to go in the wrong direction and get killed early on. But to counter that, when you start the adventure, there is a card reading. And this card reading sets up various things for your players. It sets up item locations for relics that they need in order to defeat Strahd. It sets up allies that might be able to help them. And it sets up where Strahd is and how to find him if you are prepared to actually go after Strahd. Every chapter in this book has an equivalent level next to it to say your party should be level 4 here, here. They should be level 7 in order to go to this area. That being said, I would encourage you to allow your players to roam freely rather than pushing them in a specific direction. Hopefully the card readings will allow them to explore, and that I say that in order to keep the sense of dread present throughout the adventure. They need to understand that they might not be ready for a certain town or a certain village or Castle Ravenloft itself. If they're level 3 though and they want to go fight Strahd right away and take care of this vampire menace, then I guess they can try. They will probably fail miserably, but they can try. And that's part of the charm of this adventure. Perhaps you see how far you can get in Ravenloft and then play it again at a later time. I say Ravenloft, Curse of Strahd. How far you can get in Curse of Strahd and then play it again at a later time to see how much farther you can get, or a different scenario, a different tactic you use. The original authors of Ravenloft would play this during Halloween almost every year because their players asked for it. They were like, are we going to play that Ravenloft campaign again? And it was fun because it changed with the cards, changed the location of the items and the help that they can get, but it also was kind of a challenge to see how far they could get. Like, could they actually defeat Strahd this time? Is he a monster that is defeatable? Well, surprise, in Curse of Strahd, 5th edition is very powerful. You can win this adventure. It's not all hopelessness. The book really encourages milestone leveling, and I back that. I think XP leveling, you should not be fighting everything that you run into in order to gain enough experience points to move on. But if you happen to find that relic that helps you against Strahd, that's a good point to level up. If you happen to solve the mystery of this village, that is a good point to level up. There are strategic places throughout the adventure that I think can level you nicely to allow you to finish the adventure. But it is a big sandbox, like I said, and it's kind of difficult for your players to know where is the level 4 area that I should be going to versus the level 7 area that might destroy me. So, I don't know. As a DM, I think you're in a pickle.
I'm Pickle Rick!
And I think you just need to feel out your players and feel out your game. Maybe nudge them in the right direction, but at the same time, I like the idea of keeping that dread and keeping it real. And you can keep that real dread feeling if they are level 4 and they go to a level 7 area and they are underprepared. They'll soon learn that they might need to back off from an area and go explore other places beforehand. This was sent to me by a fan. I didn't originally pick this up because it wasn't fantasy, and I didn't think I would enjoy the high fantasy that I enjoy from Forgotten Realms. And so I was kind of like, well, I'm not really into vampires and gothic horror, so why pick this up? So a fan sent it to me, and I read it, and I really, really like it. I kind of understand why people are so drawn to Ravenloft in general. There's something to be said about the brutal harshness of it and trying to figure out a way out of this impossible prison that you're in, that everybody's in. All of the citizens of Barovia are locked in this eternal hell, and they can't figure out a way of escaping. And they're trying a plethora of ways to try to have happiness in their lives, and B, escape the Barovia and escape Strahd. I would love to run this as a one-shot. I did find some rules online where you can be level 8 and run it as a 4 to 5 hour one-shot. So maybe this will be my Halloween game, and I'll try to play it every Halloween or so as a one-shot. And if you're interested in running it as a one-shot, I'll leave some links in the description down below that kind of outline how to do that. I think this adventure is thick and heavy and not good for new DMs. But I think veteran DMs will really enjoy this because there comes a certain point with veteran DMs and certain modules that they are playing out through the module, and then they just say, you know what, forget this, I'm going to run it how I want to run it. And I think the tools are here to take this adventure in your own direction and to make Strahd the creature that you want him to be. There's also a really great chapter on Strahd and how to run him, and that he should be this like ever-looming presence throughout the adventure that I really like. It's not good for new DMs, but I think it's a very awesome adventure. There is, I didn't find myself being bored reading it necessarily, but there are a couple times where I'm like, can we get to the point of this? It's another empty room. But I think playing the adventure would have those feelings of dread instilled more often by doing that. And so perhaps those empty rooms, perhaps this chunky area of Ravenloft Castle that I'm reading through would actually make more sense as the players are exploring it. Now, there are some tie-ins to the Forgotten Realms because this was an Adventure League, also an Adventure League module. So there are the factions of Faerun, the Harpers, the Emerald Enclave, the Lord's Alliance, etc. You can pick to be a part of those and get certain benefits in the game. They feel kind of forced because, like I said earlier, that Ravenloft is really its own microcosm of its own individual plane of existence, that it's separate from the Forgotten Realms, it's separate from the other planes of existence. It's even separate from the Shadowfell, which it's now wrapped up in, but it is its own separate thing. And I like it like that. I like that it's a campaign setting in its own right. So the factions feel a little bit forced, but they do give your players some benefits. So if you want to utilize those to give your players an edge, I think that's a great way to do it. So I want to say thank you really quick to my patrons on Patreon that keep these videos going. So thank you guys so much for contributing and being just a positive impact in my life, and I love it. So if you want to become a patron, we have a patron-only Discord where you can chat with me and other fine, lovely people, as well as a podcast that I release kind of whenever I get around to it, but various either interviews with my friends or I do some live games where I played some Dungeon Crawl Classics and put it up there. If you're interested in more Campaigns Explained videos, there is a playlist here that will take you to a playlist that plays them. Or if you're just interested in the channel as a whole, you can click here for a video that YouTube recommends for you. I want to say thank you guys again for watching, and beware of Strahd in your adventures.